Don't be late for the bus stop. You wouldn't want to be late to work or school, would you? So grab your change, ticket, or token and hop on the bus, surrounding yourself with strangers often shoulder to shoulder. Immerse yourself in skin-to-skin contact with dozens of other people you probably shouldn't trust. And now repeat this every day for the rest of your working life. Sounds like a great time. Wait a minute. We're supposed to be talking about creepy things at bus stops and on the bus, not the monotonous horror that is often life. Well then, enjoy the following stories. If you have a creepy story of your own, you can share it with us for a chance to have it narrated at darkstories.org. Don't ride the bus alone at night. From AmmeJeanRomeo. When I was young, 20 years old, I was working a crappy retail job. Usually, I'd have to work one of two shifts, either 8 to 5:30 p.m. or noon to 8:15 p.m. on a rotating basis. One particular day, I was working the dreaded 12 to 8 p.m. shift. The store had been locked up for the night, and I bade my colleagues goodnight, heading to the bus stop. The bus stop was 15 minutes away by foot. It was a cold night, so I all but power walked down the street. I made it to the bus stop and plopped myself down on the bench. I pulled my phone out of my pocket to check the time. 8:32 p.m. I sighed in relief. The bus was due to arrive at 8:35, so it shouldn't be long until I got back in the warmth. A couple of minutes later, the bus pulled up. I hopped in, paid my fare, and walked to the back. I sat in the very back seat, then I put on my headphones, starting off some music and getting comfortable. I had a 45-minute ride ahead of me, and I wanted to relax. About 15 minutes into the journey, the bus stopped at a quieter street. The doors opened up and an older man carrying a large overnight bag climbed in. His face was obscured by a mop of hair. I saw the driver do a double take. As the man turned towards him, the man began rifling through his bag, looking for, I'm guessing, some change or a bus pass. The driver looked uncomfortable and clearly did not want to look at the man any longer than necessary, and told him not to worry and just to go take a seat. The man grunted an affirmation and started to make his way down the aisle. It was pretty late at this point, so the only other person on the bus was an older woman who looked to be dozing off. Couldn't say I blame her. The man had plenty of seats to choose from then, but for whatever reason, he decided to sit at the back of the bus, only 2 seats away from me. I found this odd and slightly unsettling, given the reaction of the bus driver. But soon I dismissed the thought and diverted my attention back to my phone as the bus began to move again. I was tired and I wanted to get home to crawl into my warm and cozy bed. Another 5 minutes or so passed. The song I was listening to just ended, and in the break of silence that ensued before the next song began to play, I heard a strange noise coming from the man 2 seats away from me. I looked up at him out of the corner of my eye. He was hunched forward, clenching his bag tightly in his hands. This was creepy itself, but the worst part was the strange sound he was making. He was breathing heavily, panting. A small, almost giggle seemed to be escaping his mouth. I felt my heart jump in my chest. My eyes scanned the bus, seeing if the other passenger had noticed the man's strange noises. My eyes connected with the older woman, sitting near the front. She gave me a sympathetic smile, but turned quickly to face the front of the bus again. I swallowed nervously and risked another glance at the man. Then my heart froze in my chest. He was staring at me. I got a good look at his face. Long, stringy gray hair, dark, sun-aged complexion, and a large gap-toothed smile. But the worst part were his eyes. His pupils were huge and surrounded by a dark brown iris, but so little of his iris could be seen that his eyes appeared almost entirely black. One of his hands released the bag, and he motioned for me to take out my earbuds. Not wanting to anger the guy, I complied and took them off. He grinned wide at me and scooted closer. I then caught a whiff of his disgusting breath and had to hold back the urge to gag. He whispered to me in a low, gruff whisper, "Do you want to see something special?" I looked at him in confusion, and he gestured to the bag that he was holding. I took a closer look at the bag. It was old and torn, and something dark was staining the bottom of it. I shook my head quickly. No thanks, I'm good." My voice quivered as I replied. I saw the man's eyes narrow. "Are you sure?" he said, patting the bag. "I got something mighty special in here, and I wanted to share it with you." It was at this point I noticed the man had a slight American accent. I couldn't place exactly where the accent came from, but he definitely was not from around here. I forced a smile and again shook my head. "Something like that should be kept a secret," I said. The man's eyes narrowed further, and he grew quiet. I nervously cleared my throat and faced the front of the bus. Another 20 minutes of awkwardness passed. The man had said nothing further, only continued to clutch the mysterious bag. I could feel his eyes boring into the side of my face. I was so uncomfortable, I decided to break the silence. I opened my mouth to speak, but he beat me to it. "Say, girl, you work in that big department store by the roundabout, don't you? I've seen you working on the shop floor a few times." I froze in my seat. This guy knew where I worked, and when I got off this bus, he was going to know where I lived. "Yeah, it's a nice store," I answered. I didn't know what else to say. The man began to pat his bag again. "You see, I made something special with some tools I bought from your store. That's why I wanted to show you." I felt my blood freeze in my veins. Had this guy been planning to catch me on the bus? Did he know the route I always took? I'd never seen this guy in this route before, and I knew I'd never encountered him in my own workspace. I shrunk back in my seat, holding my bag protectively in front of me. I threw a glance out the window. I was only 15 minutes away from my house. I looked back at the man who was now grinning at me almost maniacally. "Your name," he said. It's Anna, right?" I stared at him wide-eyed. This guy even knew my name. He must have been stalking me. So many worst-case scenarios whizzed through my head then. I was now trying to figure out my escape route. He started to unzip the bag, and I stared wide-eyed in horror as he pulled out what appeared to be a rag doll. The doll wore a dirty white dress and was covered in similar dark stains like the bag. These stains were dark red, like dried blood. The doll had a head of long dark hair, pulled into messy pigtails. Eerily, the hair looked very real, and was actually identical in color to my own. The man held the doll towards me and said, "Here, take this. I made it for you." That was the final straw. I jumped up out of my seat and ran to the front of the bus, frantically hitting the button to get off, and to my relief, the bus came to a stop quickly. I jumped off the bus, the driver grumbling that I needed to hit the button sooner if I want to get off. I waited until I heard the bus door shut behind me before I dared to look back towards it. I shrieked. The man stood, his face pressed against the glass. and I came to understand what else had been inside the bag. He was holding a large blood-stained kitchen knife and was scraping it against the window. I saw him mouth something to me before the bus drove off. I knew what he had said. "See you soon. I'll be waiting." I booked it the remainder of the distance to my home. It wasn't until I was back in my own room, under the cover of my duvet, that I felt safe again. I never rode that bus again. I quit my job the next day and was lucky to find another job not too long later. I shudder at the thought of where the hair on that doll came from and whose blood was on that knife. I'm just grateful to have escaped with my life that night. The Woman at the Bus Station, from BritneyK. I had gone to visit my aunt in Los Angeles over vacation break from school, since the students were split into different track colors. Mine was green, and we were off for the entire month of January in 1999. By the 22nd of January, I was ready to go home to spend the remainder of the month with my parents and siblings, before of course heading back to school. My mom had asked my grandfather if he could get me from my aunt's house, and we'd catch buses back home. Early Saturday morning on January 23rd of 1999, I felt anxious and I just wanted to get going. So my grandfather and I were dropped off at a Greyhound bus station where we would be catching a bus to San Francisco. By the time we got there, I was starving, so my grandfather asked me to stay put inside the station while he left to go get us some food. You see, my grandfather had this jolly personality about him. He never saw the bad in people, so he didn't think it odd to leave me at the station. Meanwhile, he ran an errand. I felt scared being that I was only 13 years old. I was standing there surrounded by our bags and a crap ton of people. A few minutes later, this middle-aged woman approached me and kindly but firmly suggested to me that I should take a seat and watch some TV with her. Since there were these mini TVs connected to every seat that were activated by inserting quarters on the side of them, I was hesitant for a few seconds, but my legs had grown tired from just standing there waiting. The woman helped me collect the bags and take them over to where the benches were. Then we sat down. She gave me some quarters to activate a TV, and then we began to watch a black and white show that appeared. She then began to make small talk with me. I told her that I was waiting for my grandfather who had gone to get some food, to which she nodded up and down and confidently declared, "Yes, I know." I felt confused by this. How would she know that I was waiting on my grandfather? I was beginning not to trust the woman, and at that point I wanted to get up and go back to where I'd been standing, but my legs wouldn't budge. I was frozen in place. I glanced over at the woman and she smiled at me, then gently nodded towards the TV screen since it had turned off. I just sat there for a minute. Then after what felt like ages, I shakily inserted another quarter into the side of it. It buzzed back to life. I stared into the screen, not actually watching what I was seeing. I began to wonder why this woman was actually here, and what would happen. And yet I still could not move from the seat. I really don't know why I stayed there at all. I was scared, and I just wanted my grandfather to magically show up so we could go wait for our second bus en route home. Almost as if the woman had read my mind, I heard her say to me, "Your grandfather sure is taking a while, isn't he, sweetheart?" I squirmed a little at this. I just wanted to leave. I wanted to go home. After what felt like another hour, my grandfather had finally shown up with a puzzled expression on his face. He walked over to me and asked, "Who helped you bring the bags over here? They're too heavy for you to carry." I must have looked a certain way because he then softened his tone and asked me, "Sweetie pie, who was here with you?" I looked up at him and said, There was this woman, Grandpa. She gave me quarters for the TV. Am I in trouble?" Tears began to well up in my eyes, but then he surprised me by asking, "Sweetie, where is this lady now?" I looked at him feeling confused, turned around to see that there was no one there. No one at all. In fact, the previously crowded station was empty. It was just me and my grandfather. When my grandfather had dropped me off at home some hours later, I immediately told my mom about the lady at the bus station. My mom tried to lighten the mood, telling me that maybe she was an angel who was sent to look after me. But now that I'm older, I can't help but wonder what on earth that woman actually might have been, what she potentially had planned for me. I guess I'll never know, but that smile, it was far too creepy to be from an angel. Late Bus Creeper from Lyssa. This happened in March just last year. I was 13 years old, and I was horrified to take buses after this incident. Like a typical day, I was taking a public transport bus home after school, except it was a later bus than usual. I had a badminton practice after school, so this bus I never took home. I got out of practice at 5 p.m. and the next bus was 6:30, so that meant me having to wait an hour and a half for the next one. For the most part, I just played on the phone. The times for this particular bus I was taking are usually messed up and make people have to wait over an hour for the next one. Mine finally came, so I got on. I took a seat down next to two people. The two of them got off pretty quickly though, so I was soon not surrounded by anyone. I was on my phone texting some people when some late 20-something guy got on and sat next to me. I thought nothing of it, just wanting to keep to myself. But I did notice he had a bag, and apparently he had an Xbox One in it, which wasn't a big deal to me. After about 20 minutes of sitting silently, he said something along the lines of, "Hi, how are you?" I replied with, "I'm good, thanks." But he kept on talking until he had to get off. I was getting off in the next few stops, so I wasn't worried about being lonely. I was almost home after all. I thought that guy was pretty nice even though I hadn't wanted to talk and he just kept going. But I didn't think much about it after he got off, until a guy sitting a few seats away said something. He introduced himself as Jim. Jim said he knew that guy, and he'd known him for some time. He said the guy preyed on children and to not talk to him. My heart sank. When I got off the bus, I was thinking about what that guy had said. One of the things he said before he got off was, "Do you have an extra TV at home? I need one for my new Xbox." I had told him no, sorry, and then he offered to come over and let me play his Xbox at my house, asking me if my parents were home. I again said no thanks. I now knew that this guy may have been trying to get to my house. When I finally got off the bus, I was terrified, realizing this guy was a predator and that he could be following me even now, trying to see where I lived. I circled the block a few times, trying to confuse or lose anyone who may be following me. I walked home then, paranoid as all hell. I haven't seen him since, but it really freaks me out that I, of all people, encountered such a blatant predator. I'm glad I never invited him home. Stranger at the Bus Stop from Thomas A. It was autumn of 2012. I was 15 years old. I was on my way back home from a friend's house who lived about an hour away. I was waiting at a bus stop at around 9 p.m. I lived in a rural area in Germany. The streetlights here don't often work at times, which they didn't that night. I was always quite an easy person to scare, so I was just sitting there curled up a bit, creeped out and somewhat desperately waiting for that bus, which I actually still had to wait about 40 minutes for. After 15 minutes of waiting, I heard a really quiet sound, like slow footsteps, in the darkness to my right. I couldn't see who it was or how far they were. It didn't help that the bus stop had a sort of shelter cover that only opened up to the front. I couldn't see much to my sides. I was hearing these footsteps approach to my right. As an adult, I know that I should have alerted the person to my presence, as to not startle them in the middle of the night in the dark. But I was a scared little 15-year-old kid. I didn't want to draw attention to myself, so I stayed quiet. The footsteps stopped right beside me though. I was sitting right against the wall, so I could hear where they stopped. I heard these strange clicking noises and figured that the guy must be having a cigarette or a cigar right now. Then I heard a phone ring and the person picked it up. At first, I only heard a bit of voice on the other end of the phone, which I couldn't understand. I only heard that voice sounded really fast-spoken, and the speaker was female. Then she stopped, and that guy started speaking with the creepiest voice I've ever heard. Every word was so deep, and the voice was raspy. I kid you not, this is what he said. "Hell yes, I'd like something different. Now that's what I like. I like those little ones. You're gonna love these kids, at least I love them." There was a pause in the line and the woman started speaking even faster. I could hear some sort of fear in her voice. I recall thinking to myself how I could solve this situation. I checked the time first. I had 20 minutes to wait, and that was far too much time to just sit here and wait it out. So I did something stupid. I called out, "Hello?" He was still on the phone and the woman was talking, but when I spoke, he immediately hung up on her, as if he had been caught doing something he shouldn't. Then there was silence, only some raspy breathing erupting in the night air. After an undetermined amount of time, the silence was broken when he began to walk again. I couldn't make out where they were going, and then there was a knock coming on the wall behind me, the glass wall. The guy, for whatever reason, didn't go in front of me to confront me, but rather had snuck behind me. I wondered then if he didn't know that there was a back wall to this thing. I jumped and turned around, only to see the most terrifying thing in my life. The guy was at least 6'7", if not more. He was staring down at me with menacing-looking eyes wide open. He was wearing an all-black suit, a fedora of some kind, and had long, messy, greasy brown hair. Through the glass, he asked me, "What did you hear?" I answered with a weak, "What? Nothing. Just someone on the phone." He seemed to think for a long time, his eyes piercing me all the while. Then he slowly, in a deep voice, said to me, "I can easily find out who you are. I can find where you live. If I hear anything about this, I will get you." He smiled and still stood there, but I was frozen in shock. He began to walk around the stop towards me, but I was so horrified by then, I was able to muster enough courage to pick up my feet and run at full speed away from him, towards the city where my friend lived. I made it back okay, and I never saw the man again. What exactly he was talking about on the phone that he didn't want other people hearing, I have no idea, but I'm terrified that if I speak up, he'll find me just like he said. Ravenous Hounds from Angel. This happened when I was in 5th grade. I live in a bit of a wooded area, but there are houses all around. When I was in the 5th grade, I was dropped off at my bus stop on a Friday. My house was only 3 houses down from the bus stop. My house is kind of different though. It's got 2 acres of land instead of 1, and the empty land is closest to the stop. As I was walking home on the road, I was about a house or so away from my own home. There were 2 tiny dogs. I would like to say that they looked like miniature pinschers, a white one and a black one. The dogs started barking at me and I kinda shrugged it off, but I jumped a bit as I was easily startled back then. I started walking on, and then from my right I saw 2 large black dogs ran out of a yard and went over to me. I didn't see them coming until it was too late, because the area they came from was overgrown and abandoned. All you could see were tall bushes, dead brown trees, and such. The dogs came barreling towards me, causing me to freeze up. When I unfroze, I put my binder to my side and stopped cradling it. These hounds were barking at me, drooling. You could tell they were hungry, and you could plainly see the bones in their rib cages. I screamed then, which I think completely saved my life. From the corner of my eye, I saw something brown speeding towards me. My dog, an old chocolate lab named Snickers. She heard me scream and came over. I'm surprised she could tell from that distance that it was my scream. She came to my rescue and stood snarling right next to me, protecting me from the other dogs. The dogs weren't as brazen, but still drew closer slowly. I screamed again, this time my Nana and Papa coming. They threw rocks at the dogs, trying to keep them at bay. And then my Papa put me on the 4-wheeler he was on and drove away with me as I cried. The dogs pursued us for some time before finally running off. My Nana hugged me back home, and Snickers licked my face. I was happy, but also horrified that on my own street, a couple of dogs trying to eat me, and seeing the way they acted, I had no doubt that that's what they were trying to do. I'm 18 now. Snickers passed away back in February of 2016. Dogs aren't just a man's best friend. They can also be your lifesaver. You'd think that I would be scared of dogs because of this, but I'm not. I love and respect them more than ever, and I know Snickers was the best girl. Be careful at bus stops and keep your eyes peeled when you ride the bus. I know that when you ride a bus or wait at a bus stop, you're most likely exhausted at the end of a long workday. But when you close your eyes or turn away to relax, you leave yourself wide open to the horrific things and people that are constantly looking for any moment to prey on people like you. So be careful, and don't forget to thank the bus driver. Good night. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you want me to read your story, share it with us at darkstories.org. If you want to support the show, check out the links in the description to donate via Patreon or to shop my merchandise. Now, as usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous video about 5 farm horror stories. Corey Black says, "Moo, I'm a cow." Nice to meet you, Corey. I'll be eating you at McDonald's quite soon. Ethan Johnson says, "When you're so early, it says no views." More like, when the channel's so dead, it's got 2 views after a year. My greatest fear. Jay Spade says, "For F's sakes, Darkness. Gotta upload at night and force me to watch from the farm I live on. Thanks, mate. Hey, it's my job to scare people as much as possible. I see this as a great success. I wonder what mysterious or creepy things lurk on your farm, Jay." Sadaf Tariq says, "Hello from Pakistan. Love your channel, keep up the good work." Thanks so much. I love hearing from people from all over the world. It always inspires me to want to gather some stories from that location. Some Pakistan ghost stories would be great. And Marble and Marble says, "Get Darkness to 1 million. I'm not sure that'll ever happen, but as long as I can continue to read you guys' stories and have someone listen, I think I'll be happy." Well, that brings us to the end of this Darkness Prevails episode. But don't worry, more scary stories are on the way soon, so stay tuned. Until next time, Here are the credits to my amazing patrons who continue to donate. They're great people. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.